This is Marty with Marty's Diesel, and today's video is going to cover cleaning out your selector valve. This is required when doing a pre-pump solutions kit and is generally suggested for you to do whenever troubleshooting pre-pump issues. With my limited animation skills, I'm going to try and illustrate what needs to occur to make this as simple as possible. Usually, we remove the lines and inspect the ports to see if there is any obvious debris in them. If your sending units have lost their umbrellas at any time since the late 90s, this selector valve can be clogged with debris. Start by regulating your shop air down to 10 psi, however you see fit. Overpressurizing the valve can damage it. Next, we backfeed air into the top of the selector valve. Air should only be coming out of one port. We switch the valve from front to rear and verify that the airflow switches properly. Make sure that the port that is being switched to is the only port passing air. If it does not switch properly, you must address this issue now before reusing your selector valve. After we have worked it back and forth a few times, you should be ready to switch to another port. Sometimes we see debris shoot out of these valves, so make sure you wear eye protection. Install a line or use a long air blower to reach the rearward facing inlet port and select front tank on your dash. Blow through and it should have air pressure passing through the selector valve to the top feed port. Verify that air is not coming out of any of the other ports. Have someone else switch to the rear tank on the dash and you should see, hear, and feel the selector valve switch. Now there should be no ports with air coming out of them. Do this a few times, and if everything works as described, you're ready to move on to the next step. If not, you need to stop here and figure out why it isn't switching. Next, you can take a line and hook it up to the bottom inlet port on the selector valve. This is for the rear tank. You should have air passing through the top port. Have someone switch the dash to the front tank, and the air should stop passing through. There should be no air coming out of any ports on the valve. After you do this a few times and everything is working properly, you should be all set. Make sure your sending units are blown out in a similar manner and make sure that the umbrellas are installed. You must use umbrellas if you are using a selector valve. This is because the umbrella screen is the first filter in your fuel system. It protects the sending unit's 90-degree bends, the quick disconnect fittings, and the selector valve restrictions from collecting debris. With a properly cleaned system and our pre-pump solutions kit, your vacuum numbers should fall within our specifications. As a side note, if you are replacing your selector valve, please do not use the aftermarket knockoffs. Yes, I know the OEM valves are ungodly expensive, but so is breaking down. Now that I've explained how to do this and provided animation and photos, here is a real-time video where I perform the above procedure. Enjoy! Alright, so here I've got regulated shop air. We're going to do 10 psi. What we're going to do is we're actually going to backfeed the selector valve with about 10 psi regulated shop air. It doesn't matter which tank you're on for the beginning of this test. So right now I hear that it's going through. Which tank is selected up there? Rear. So right now you're going to have air coming out of this rear feed port. Alright, switch it to the front. You can feel the selector valve change, you can hear the selector valve change, and air is now coming out of the rear port of the selector valve. I'm going to pause the video real quick and I'm going to show you how we set this up to where we purge the selector valve from the other side. Alright, now we've got air, 10 psi, going into the rear feed for the selector valve. Now that rear feed is actually going to be for the front tank. Right now, I've got air that's coming out of this line, which is attached to the top of the selector valve, which ordinarily goes to your fuel pump assembly. Go ahead and switch to the front of the rear tank. All of a sudden, the noise changes. No longer is this air going through the selector valve. Not only are we verifying operation of the selector valve, we're also cleaning it out. I'm going to pause and I'm going to switch tools so that we can blow out the other side of the selector valve. Alright, so here we are. We're feeding air into the rear tank feed into the selector valve. We're giving it about 10 psi of air. And go ahead and switch tanks. You can immediately hear it change. You can feel it change. And now it's there's no air going through the selector valve because now it's set up to go from the front tank. So that right there, over the course of like 3 or 4, turns back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, that's how I want you to clean out your selector valve when you're installing your pre-pump kit.